The ladies are standing by as well as our guests because as today is the last day of the month of April, we are shining a spotlight right back on autism, which is commemorated in April for us to raise awareness. Once again, this is Jasiri. Once again, please accept our apologies. We'll take a quick time out and the conversations will start.
We want to say a very big thank you for staying with us on Jasiri this morning. And of course, you heard when Tolu introed the show, he said autism is celebrated, commemorated in the month of April. So today, the spotlight is still on autism. Autism, a word that still carries confusion, stigma, and silence in many parts of our society. But behind the word are real children, families, and futures. Autism spectrum disorder affects how people communicate, relate, and process the world around them. And while it is not a disease or something to be cured, it is often misunderstood, especially here in Nigeria. From misdiagnosis to harmful myths, and from limited resources to a lack of inclusive space in schools and public life, the challenges for this spectrum is so many. But so are the stories of resilience, love, and advocacy. Today on Jasiri, we'll take a closer look at what it means to live with or care for someone with autism in Nigeria. What do families need? What's working? And what still needs to change? How do we build a more informed, compassionate, and inclusive society? Joining us on the table once again is David Oludaye, an applied psychologist and the executive director of Lifeline and Milestone Inclusive Development Consult. He's a certified special needs therapist and a strong advocate for disability inclusion. David, welcome back to the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here again.
So I missed the first time we were here, but I was I was told that you got raving reviews. And of course, as the month is ending, it's not just a one-off conversation. We wanted to sustain the spotlight on it. So let's pick up some of the places because we didn't get through everything we wanted to get to with you the first time around. One of the things we've been seeing is in many instances, whether it's these kind of I guess we say neurological disorders or even daily things, there's a difference between how they play out and how they affect men and women and boys and girls. And so I'd really like to see if we have that same situation with autism. Does autism manifest differently in boys versus girls?
All right. Again, autism is a neurological condition and definitely imparts behavior, social interaction, emotions, and also executive functioning. All right, when you talk about boys and girls, definitely, you know, there is difference in the gender, and in a boy child, truly you would say that autism manifests differently in a boy from a girl. Because when you look at a girl child, you know, this thing that you say about ladies with mood swing or something like that, and you know, so it's easy for a girl child to easily mask autism symptoms and signs, you know, cover up for it. And while it is also misunderstood in boys too, for you know, the energy of a boy child playing around and all of that, yeah. So and when those children begins to grow up and hit puberty stage, you know, the girl child develops differently from the boy child.
Yes.
And so the manifestation is actually a biological difference factor. All right, so the difference is actually manifest because of the biological difference between a boy child and a girl child, you know. So, but when they begin to grow up into adulthood, like I said earlier, you know, for the girl, autism will manifest in a way that you would think that it is mild, but in the boy child, you would think it is severe. Because, you know, the other time I was talking about comorbidity, you know, the same way ADHD it's difficult to diagnose in a boy child because readily you feel that he's a boy, he's just being stubborn, he's just hyperactive and all of that, you know. And in the boy child, when the boy begins to grow up, all right, so it's difficult to now begin to, you know, cover up again because the child has passed the age where you can begin to mix up things because of lack of diagnosis. Because I said when the child is still at the early stage, it's difficult to actually diagnose, and that is why we have a criteria in the diagnostic statistical manual. You know, if you don't meet up with those criteria, then we can certify that you are autistic or not.
Okay,
all right?
Milestones.
Yes. So apart from the milestone, when you're talking about the diagnosis now, there are criteria you need to meet up with. So you don't just assume that this person is autistic because ordinarily in the boy child, you will see some things while still at the early stage that is, the same with some of the signs you see in autism.
So then, how do we identify early enough in the boy child and in the girl child? What are the things to look out for as a parent, a caregiver, and as someone who's responsible, like a teacher, even in school, in learning spaces? What are the things that we need to look out for to identify autism in young children?
Oh, okay. You see, when we talk about identification, we also talk about early identification. Because as much as it is difficult to diagnose very early, it is still the best time to actually diagnose because of early intervention.
I know that when people, like children, I had a friend who was really worried. Her daughter was 15 months and wasn't walking early. And she was panicking that, you know, is it normal that for a child to not walk by 15 months? Okay. And then at 16 months is when the child began to walk. So in cases like that, does that have anything to do with like autism or anything in that range? Okay, so like I said the last time, you see, children would develop at different pace, right? We need to establish that. For example, my son actually started walking, you know, in a stable manner, not until he was 1. Right? Okay. So at that time, you know, we had concerns because we had a lot of people who have their children walking at 8 months, 9 months, and all of that. But, you know, because I have the understanding that children will develop differently. All right, but when we talk about early identification, I would say that it is a multidisciplinary effort, right? Because we have different specialists that needs to look into different areas. We have speech and language pathologists. We have, a psychologist who will look at the behavioral aspects and all of that. You know, bringing all of this together. But the 4 basic things we have to look out for, all right, has to do with the manner of repetitive behavior you see in that child. You know, sometimes you see the child is just fixated on some particular thing. You see he's looking at you, but he's not focusing on you, probably just focusing on your hearing, on just the button on your shirt. And the guy is just, just looking at that alone. And so when you continually see these signs, and, you know, you see the child is not also playing with other children, like you see every other kid would do with themselves, right? Then you also see a lot of, sensory deregulation in that child. You know, so these are not typical. These are things you don't see in the typical children, right? So then you begin to see all of these things. Then it is important that you begin to seek for, proper diagnosis and assessment.
Well, you know, we're talking autism, especially a lot in children, and I'm very aware that in Nigeria, autism is something that we're just coming to. In fact, a lot of people would over the years, now even looking back at some of the people I've met that are undiagnosed, they thought their children were possessed. You know, we have these things in Africa that they just think that there's some demonic spiritual aspect to what your child is going through. So is it possible that someone can actually exist into adulthood, grow fully to become an adult before there's a diagnosis? Have you seen cases like that?
Yes. I mentioned the last time that I have a case of about 39 years old that I am handling at the moment. All right. So now, because when I started the assessment, I discovered a lot of misconception, a lot of myth that actually promoted the kind of mindset the parents had.
Yeah.
So while the child was growing up, they actually assumed it was something else. They went from one church to the other, and definitely, you know, for someone who is ready to deceive people, when they see those kind of cases, they tell you a lot of things. It's spiritual. You have to fast. You have to, you know, do a lot of things, right? So. Not only in that case, I've seen many other cases that my attention has been called to. We have seen a lot of adults who, when they grow up, they now begin to find out that they are actually different.
Yeah.
Because now they can, you know, speak for themselves. They can now think and see the way every other person do their things normally, and they feel that they are different. You know, so they now begin to see the reason to, you know, seek, you know, what's it called, seek intervention, and from there, you know, you get the pointer to get assessed or diagnosed. So we have a lot of them, but not many cases in Nigeria, because we have a lot of adults living with autism who have not been diagnosed. Wow. Yes, but when we come across them, you know, because of the regular challenges that they face, you know, they have to, you know, talk to someone. Then, like I said, because I am into this, I can say,
yes,
you know, but I cannot tell you that this is what it is, because it is not allowed. It is not ethical to do that. But we have a lot of adults who grow up to find out that they are actually neurodivergent. You know, it could be any diagnosis. I don't want to fix it on autism. Yeah.
I want to quickly sneak in, because there's been a lot of conversation about the connection between autism or some of these disorders and vaccines. And I know, David, you've heard a lot of that. And I know there's somebody who's probably watching who said, are they not going to touch on it? And we have to touch on it. Because that is, in the West in particular, is leading to a lot of vaccine hesitancy. Because people are saying that there's a correlation. Let's speak to that here for us in the Nigerian context, in the African context of things. The vaccine conversation or the vaccine controversy and the spike in such disorders like autism.
Yes. When we talk about vaccines and you know, the interaction with the brain of an individual, you know, making them, you know, fall on the spectrum of the different kind of diagnoses that we have. You see, we don't necessarily have to pin it on a specific vaccine, right? Because in psychology, there is what you call behavioral teratology. It has to do with the environmental factor that influences you know, the child's development. And later when they are born, they are diagnosed with any of this disorder, right? And any of the manifestation of the spectrum. You see, even right from the pregnancy stage, right? The first, second, and the third trimester, the kind of medication the mother of the child takes. That is why you go to the hospital, a well-meaning healthcare professional will tell you that even though you are sick, pregnant mom, you cannot take this medication because they know the impact on the developing child in the womb. Do you get what I'm saying here? So then we have a lot of, you know, diagnoses such as cerebral palsy, Down syndrome, and all of that. I had the case of a child that was brought to me not more than 1.5 years, right? So the child actually had, you know, certain potential to actually manifest the signs and symptoms of certain disorder. However, it was not triggered until the child went for an operation. And because the child went for this operation and there was no referral from the hospital where the child was given birth to, because they have the health history of that child. So there was no, so when I got reports, all right, from the hospital about the operation and everything that went on, so the child actually is now living with spastic cerebral palsy, all right? And you see, when I actually made my findings, I found out that the case would have still be, you know, manageable. until that time. So we have a lot of environmental factors.
So why didn't
Apart from just mere vaccination, because we can't just pin any vaccine now to say, because of course, if a child do not get the necessary vaccination,
yes,
while at certain age of development, you know, it can actually lead to being diagnosed with these challenges too.
Okay.
Do you see that now?
Yeah.
All right. So it is the misuse of the medication or the misapplication of vaccination that can actually trigger or lead to these things.
All right, we need to take a quick time out. The conversation will continue as we spotlight the fight for inclusion concerning autism. Stay with us. Now today on Jasiri, we're shining a light on a topic that's too often misunderstood, autism. In Nigeria, awareness is growing, but stigma and misinformation still stand in the way of support, inclusion, and proper care. Stay with us is David Oludaye, an applied psychologist and the executive director of Lifeline and Milestone Inclusive Development Consult. David, let's pick up from our conversation. There's a lot more to what we're talking about, but we've talked about a number of issues in terms of diagnosis,
yes,
as it may be. But I think it's also important that because you've mentioned something, some of these neurological disorders share similar traits between ADHD,
yep,
autism spectrum disorder, and some other things. How can we ensure a specific or not even a specific diagnosis, but a correct diagnosis?
Okay, like I said earlier, diagnosis is not a one-way thing, right? It actually takes multidisciplinary effort to be able to diagnose properly. In Nigeria, I would not say there is anyone who can accurately diagnose. So we use the word assessment.
Okay.
All right, backed up with, you know, what I call the diagnostic statistical manual. So everyone is going to put in effort, even the intervention. There's what you call IEP. All right, you call it individualized education plan. Right. So it's also multidisciplinary, because when you want to give a tailored intervention to anyone, one of the things you do is to bring in the effort of, for example, you want to offer intervention for somebody living on the autism spectrum, right? You need a speech therapist. So a speech pathologist would have to assess that child's level of speech and language disorder, right? You have an occupational therapist work on the child to know the level of severity of the condition as has to do with daily functioning. You would also need a psychologist to look at the mental health aspect of it, then the behavioral dysfunction, right? We'll be able to assess all of that. So when you bring in all of these multidisciplinary efforts, then you can arrive at a point where you would say that this is what is going on, and this would help us, because you cannot have a tailored intervention. Don't forget that the manifestation of this disorder is actually different from one child to the other.
Absolutely, yeah.
You see that? And so even if this child is autistic and this child is autistic, their intervention is not going to be the same.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all.
Wow. No, it's not at all.
It's tailor-made.
So, yes, and because if you do not assess the child properly, then you would be given the wrong intervention.
Which in fact, sometimes may even push the child back.
Yes.
Wow.
So the child would experience what we call relapse. All right?
Wow.
Okay. So now that we know that autism is it's an emotional, I think it isn't just about behavior and communication. It also deeply affects emotional well-being and mental health.
And also executive functioning.
And then executive. So I'm going to digress a bit. I have my question, but I'm going to digress a bit. Is it something that can be cured, or it's something you just have to manage for the rest of the person's life? That's number one. Okay. And then number two, how does living with autism affect the individual and in the long run affect a family?
Okay, so let me take it from the first.
Yes, please.
So can you take the question again?
The first one is that, is it something that can be treated, can be, resolved?
The word you used was cured.
Cured, yes. Okay, so autism cannot be cured, But the function of therapy is to increase independence, to also increase daily functioning, then to reduce unwanted behavior and increase desired behavior. Because every behavior, meltdown, tantrum that an autistic child actually manifests, they have function. All right? So the function of therapy is actually to increase independence, because what makes this spectrum to be overwhelming for the family and the parent is when the child becomes totally dependent. I've had the experience of so many parents that their family are not together again. You understand what I'm talking about. Then some of them lost their job, they can't cope, managing the child, and even sometimes it is the financial implication, because the woman or the man wants to keep up with the therapy of the child, but it's just draining.
Especially financially.
Yes, it happens, and that is why we always, advocate that, as much as we are looking at these children living with these, neurodevelopmental disorders, we also need to pay attention to their family and parents.
Yes.
Very, very important. Very, very important. These days, I don't just talk about training therapists who would just offer intervention. I also advise parents to also get trained to be their child's therapist. I do that a lot. So, and you were talking about the impact of
the individual and the
diagnosis on the family. Just like I started saying, it's sometimes overwhelming. In fact, a lot of time overwhelming, because any diagnosis oftentimes changes the dynamics of the family. Because it also depends. If you don't have an understanding husband as a woman, I would also say that, a lot of time it comes on the woman's head. Right? So when you don't have an understanding husband or family, where they believe in a lot of superstitious belief and all of that, this cannot be the child of my son, that's coming from the mother-in-law, you should take this child back to where
you got them from.
Some of them are having some religious mindset about it too. Like probably you are not prayerful, you must have sinned to have this kind of child and all of that. So it impacts the family dynamics in a lot of ways, even far beyond what you can actually see in that family. Sometimes it breaks the parents emotionally. Sometimes the siblings of that child, they can cope because of the stigma. It impacts them in so much way. In fact, sometimes some parents, when they have a child on the spectrum as the first child, they don't want to give birth anymore.
They don't want it to happen again.
Do you understand? So we also still, advise them to go ahead, because that child actually, because the acceptance will be in the family. The child needs people who will continue to, play the role of family as siblings. They grow up together. So we still advise that they go ahead to, ensure that they have another child.
Resentments. I've seen situations where other siblings resent that child because of the time, the emotion, the stigma, that it takes away from their own parenting experience. It's a lot.
And sometimes the care of them is forced on them. Even when they do.
Yes, a lot of time. A child, I had a case some time ago. The child is living with hydrocephalus. That's different from microcephalus we mentioned the other time. So the sibling of that child, because whenever I'm actually having an assessment, I also assess the family too, to understand what is going on, because I would always need the family to ensure that we give proper intervention to the child. So I found out that the sister of that child was already overwhelmed. More like the child doesn't want to come home, because every time the parents are always asking her to stay with the sister in the house.
Because they too are looking for a break.
You see that now? And so this sibling would just decide to stay out of the house, to just, stay away from the stress.
You have to bless us. You have to go for
Okay,
break.
so I want to ask about misconceptions that you have to debunk, but I need you to think on that. We'll go on a short break. Then when we come back, we'll answer the question. Just stay with us.
Many thanks for staying with us. We're still talking about autism, and we still have our guest David with us. Now, before the break, I was going to ask, are there any misconceptions that you find yourself having to constantly debunk, especially within the Nigerian or African context? And I know we touched on some earlier. I know there are more.
A lot of them. Yes, misconception, first of all, from the religious aspect.
Of course.
A lot of it in that area.
Like this is a punishment for someone.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, your great grandfather offended the gods.
Yes. So then we also have what we call traditional beliefs. All right. The belief system in the family oftentimes imparts how they actually perceive neurodevelopmental disorders. Right? Because in a family where the way they actually get married depends on the kind of ritual that they make the woman to actually go through. So when they now find out that they're having a child on the spectrum, they find a way to link it to those traditional beliefs, right? So I mentioned the last time, that case is still at hand. This woman actually was looking for help, went to a pastor. And by the grace of God, I actually, by divine calling, I am in the ministry of the gospel, right? So, and because of this, it makes me wonder where those people get those kind of mindset from. This woman particularly, I was still discussing with this woman just last month in Ghana, right? So she talked about how she went to a pastor, and the pastor said that, see, you need a lot of prayer and deliverance. I made this woman to sleep in church for 3 years, when the woman ought to have started taking the child to get proper intervention. And for that 3 years, they lost that, and there is no improvement because they kept looking for the demon that is not in that child to expel. So this woman lived in the church for 3 years. Do you understand what I'm talking about here? So we are not invalidating the place of your belief in God to offer miracles and intervention. I strongly believe in that. You see what I'm saying here? However, we need to understand that there are things that just happen to us, and they become, dysfunction in our system. And we have to live with those things and sometimes manage them. And neurodevelopmental disorder falls in this kind of, category.
I'm even asking, how do we move beyond the surface level, of care and find a way to integrate meaningful mental health support into their everyday, experience? How can we better support their mental and emotional health, especially people living with autism or people that are on the spectrum, especially in a system where mental health struggles to get attention, the kind of attention it deserves, even in adults that are relatively healthy, is still a challenge. But how do we make these people feel included?
1 minute, David, because of time. Very quickly.
All right, so now I would say that what we have to do now at this phase of the education system of our country is to ensure that inclusion is part of the policy in our education system. And that would mean especially the people who suffer the most. Many of those children are in public schools, and it's worse because they don't even have people who cater for them at all. So I would advise that every public school should have at least 1 or 2 special need teachers in every public school who would look after the children who are on the spectrum alone. All right, and also to be part of the law of the education system for private school to also ensure that they all have special needs teachers who will look after these children alone, because tell me, and I will let you know, that they cannot cope in the present classroom
Situation that we
condition.
have.
Yes.
All right. So unfortunately, David, our time is far spent. I would have snuck something in, but I think our technical director will have a heart attack because of our time. But thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for coming back again. And we do hope that those who have been watching the first time David was with us, and today, as we wrap up April and the month of awareness for autism, have been enlightened and have their eyes out. It doesn't mean that we should stigmatize, but it does mean that we are opening people's eyes. And for the caregivers, the families, and the neurodivergent individuals, we hope to build a much more inclusive society. Thank you so much for joining us today. Again, apologies for the technical difficulties. We will see you on the other side of this day, which means when we see you again, it will be May. Until next time, stay kind. I can't emphasize that enough. Stay kind and stay curious. We'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.